All right, everybody ready? Everybody ready to go?
Yep.
7:02. All right, I'll call the regular meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission to order, October 28th. Roll call, I'm George Clausen, the chair, Peter Marchand, John Cooney, Willie Platt, Charlene Lavoie is an alternate, Adam Quaglioli is an alternate, Rista Malanka is also an alternate. Charlene, I'd like to seat you tonight, if I could. And do we have any public comment from something other than what we have on the agenda? All right, agenda review, I'd like to get your approval to move item 6A, which is the decision on 4A, to follow 4A, so we can get that out of the way before we actually proceed to the second public hearing.
I move that, make that motion.
Okay.
I second it.
Okay. Any questions or comments? All in favor?
Did we address the 3 and 6 base from the COG?
We're just moving an item on the agenda.
We're just
Okay.
moving it.
Moving it
Oh,
item
moving it, sorry.
on the agenda, yeah. All right, all in favor? Okay. Any other comments or moves that we need to make on the agenda?
So,
Okay, the first public hearing is actually a continuation of what we had at our last meeting, which is PZC 24-10-2, zoning regulation amendment, applicant, Town of Winchester, proposal of Winchester Planning and Zoning Commission recognized the need for municipal and privately owned public parking lots to support a vibrant downtown. The proposed regulation changes are intended to allow for parking lots as a principal use in the town center, residential, town center, and town gateway zoning districts. Do we have any other communications come in with regards to that?
Just the response letter from the COG, which came back on September 16th. I'm sorry, date received August 27th. 2000. No, I'm sorry. September 16th, yes.
We'll read that into,
Sure. Would you want me to read the questions and?
well, just the September 16th correspondence, so everybody's heard it and seen it.
So let's see, description of the proposal, the town of Winchester has submitted a proposed amendment to the zoning regulations to amend. Okay, and then regional impact review comments. COG staff has reviewed the proposed amendments and offers the following for consideration by the commission. How are the parking spaces defined and regulated when they total between 3 and 6 spaces? The proposed language has provisions for a site plan approval for greater than 3 spaces, section 3.h.1.c, and definitions only for small and large scale appears to be erroneously labeled as small in the proposed language, which was corrected. Thank you, Mr. Marchand. This may need clarification to avoid a gap in the regulation intention. Instead of using the term waiver, which can be interpreted as a function of the zoning board of appeals and variance proceedings, we would suggest that the proposed language in section 3-H-3 be simplified to state that the commission may deem the information contained within section 3-H-2 may not be necessary in all cases of site plan application submission, depending on site specific site characteristics and proposed improvements at the sole discretion of the commission upon formal acceptance of the application. Lastly, dedicated parking provisions, particularly municipally owned or free of charge, are great attractions for downtown visitation and vibrancy. However, it is recommended that careful planning be implemented for these standalone principles uses, as they can supplement, I think it's supposed to be supplement.
Supplant.
Supplant, okay, opportunities for economic growth, on individual parcels as well and can be difficult to replace once established. Otherwise, the staff on Northwest Hills Council of Governments finds no apparent conflict with the regional plans or policies or the concerns of the adjacent towns.
This draft, we're getting ahead, but the draft that you have doesn't reflect any response to the September 16th letter, however, right?
The only thing we changed said the oversight for the small to large. And, no, I didn't. I didn't make another
All right, so
edit
what-
of
that
the
would have to
waiver at
be
the
noted.
end.
All right, then let's, any other comments before we open it up for?
Yeah, subsection C still has parking areas containing more than 3 parking spaces, which is the other item
I
they're
think,
after.
right. I think that's in our regulations now, though. That's why I was wondering if maybe we should consider changing.
What section are you?
This is section C on page 2.
Section
Section 3H.
C.
C.
On a small scale.
I see on page 2 of the notes, is this what you've given us as the proposed
Yes,
draft?
yeah.
Correct, except for that change, and the waiver at the end, yes.
All right.
Well, the waiver, we can change it to what Rob is suggesting, or we don't have to. That's just
The terminology.
that's a
that-
terminology, and different planners use different, like, I think either one is okay.
But when you give us this, and it's got line through things, why didn't we have something that had it all?
Oh, the clean version?
Yeah.
Well, just so that we've got something we absolutely are acting on.
Yep.
All right,
So,
go ahead.
you tell me if it's as appropriate to talk about this now, right here. I'm particularly concerned about COG's caution to us. In the next to the last paragraph, it's recommended that careful planning be implemented for these standalone principal uses as they can supplant opportunities for economic growth on individual parcels as well, and can be difficult to replace once established. So that's a caution, and what can we, or what are we doing to address or think about that caution or prevent the problems that that's alluding to there? And I've sort of always had that in the back of my mind, given, where some of these already proposed standalone parking lots we're talking about, like on Meadow Street.
Well, the process of approval, maybe we should include, so to make sure these are special permits, small or large, so that we're talking
Well,
about that.
I don't disagree with that, but I think it's only part of the picture. If we don't have enough parking, that is also preventing economic growth and development, because there's not enough places for people to park. That's the situation we're finding ourselves right now. I can't tell you how many times I've turned around and not gone out when I was planning it, because I can't find a parking space. We're not walkable enough. So I think that when we're looking at these applications and when we're talking to the town where these municipal parking lots should be, that's the time to have those conversations, but we need to allow it. We need to allow for some growth. We don't have any,
Well, I'm not saying don't allow it, but
Yeah.
I'm saying, how do we,
well, and that's where.
acknowledge this caution, and how, or do we address it?
Well, I think we did address it when we talked about
Okay, in
the
terms of
small
certain
versus
size.
the large. So
Yeah.
we were gonna allow it by site plan with the small scale, but anything much bigger that would take up much more valuable land is gonna be that large scale. So I think you've had those concerns right from the beginning, and I think that's what we addressed and why we changed the small scale to the large scale.
Okay, but
site
when they
plan
read
versus-
this, when they read our proposal, they're still coming up with that caution.
So I think an additional example of control, like the minimal distance between multiple lots. So you don't have 2 adjacent lots right next to each other.
Uh-huh.
Well,
That's
that can help with circulation. I think it's,
Well, is that?
if I were to review
That's
this.
just an example.
Yes,
If I
that's a
were to
good one.
review this, I would not have put that in here.
I know, but somebody did and they did,
Right.
so, and
Yeah.
it does reflect the concern that
Yeah.
at least one of us has had, and so I'm wondering, does our proposed regulation, you know, get to that? And I know that it does in some respects, Rista, you worked diligently on that, but I'm wondering if there's something else. And that's a good point, which is some sort of, limitation or restriction on.
As far as the
Density.
proximity is the
Yeah,
same.
proximity and distance, and we don't have anything like that in here.
But with regards to that, if you got a small one and then all of a sudden you get another lot that becomes available to increase the size of that whole parking, I mean, that could
Exactly.
be beneficial.
Well, but also it could be, could end up
Well,
being
that's
all
why I
of
think-
Lake Street and, you know.
Well, I think that part of it is the approval process, so that, you know, we have the special permit, if we can do it with that,
Okay.
we could consider the proximity of these things as well as part of our considerations. That's part of the
But-
why, you know.
But to address what you said, Verista, the actual first one we're thinking of isn't really a solution for where you're talking about, which is in the heart of downtown.
I-
So,
Yeah, I also.
and
thi-
I also worry about, you know, the blank, the teeth coming out of our Main Street facade and then trying to put parking lots in there.
But, well, I mean, I think the reality of a private developer coming in and putting in a municipal parking lot, it's either gonna be because they have a development and they need the parking needs for it and it's on a separate lot. It's not gonna be because they're gonna make so much money
No.
for it. So it's either gonna be connected to a development or it's gonna be a municipal lot. And I don't think that the town is gonna intentionally reduce tax revenue when there's not a need. So I do think, you know, there's some checks and balances when it comes to just a municipal or a public-private parking lot.
By the nature of the
By the nature of
endeavor.
it,
Uh-huh.
right, because it's gonna cost money to own the land and to make the improvements, and you're gonna have it connected to something to be worthwhile.
Which is why we haven't had any.
Right. And then also, there's limited land downtown to do it.
Very true.
You know, we're not gonna get many more curb cuts from the state, you know, like, there's a lot of limitations that go into making it feasible. I don't think the regulations need to add
Yeah.
those layers.
So, that's what concerns me about growing parking lots in the residential neighborhoods that surround downtown. And they could grow pretty substantially with some of these old, whatever this industrial heritage nonsense is. Uh, So we end up with a lot of parking lots in neighborhoods, potentially. I mean, this board might have more
For
sense.
what purpose, though? Somebody's not gonna just take I mean, is the municipality gonna?
I don't know, this applies to both private and public, and I understand Rissa's point about that private enterprise will consider the costs and
Exactly.
and the outlay and so forth for it, but, okay, I'm just expressing
No,
my
I'm glad
concerns,
you
and
mentioned
I
that,
know
because-
we've gone over this before, and that was part of this whole development, but I figured since we're talking about it in a public forum tonight, I wanted to bring that up as an issue.
Anybody else have any comments before we open it back up for
No.
public? Anybody in the audience have any questions with regards to this proposal? Okay. Then the commission, anything else that we need before we close the public hearing?
So I can
Go
talk
ahead.
about.
If you're concerned about Main Street and the facade, I mean, then you should change the regulations in Main Street that you can't remove a building and put a parking lot. You know, we're lucky with 508, we can't, because DOT would take away, I don't know, 12 parking
Oh, sure.
spaces if we're trying to do that empty lot there.
Which one, Candace?
508 Main Street.
The one that the building was taken down at?
Town tore down.
Yeah.
Oh, where the laundromat was?
No.
No,
No,
which-
down here to the, past, by the way.
Above
Yeah.
J&B
Oh, yeah,
Appliance.
yeah, right, right.
So, you know, that has already been deemed by
DOT.
DOT as, we would lose parking on Main Street
Sure.
if that were a possibility. I never thought that would be, it's a dangerous.
Right, right. How about further down where the laundromat was, and they've landscaped that very nicely, and quickly, right? That was a fast
Well, it took a
job.
long time before
And
that
why
happened.
did that not into a parking lot.
Why do that?
Why did it not?
That wasn't their desire.
I think it's going to be an extension of its
I
potentially
see.
could be.
I see,
You know,
okay.
because they wanted to expand parking, so it may be where it is now.
Yeah.
How it looks.
Yeah,
It may be
They'll extend it on the top.
extended out to the building to be a parking lot for Beersley Library. So it is tied to a, as you said, it's tied to a development, it's tied to a plan.
yeah,
But specific to, related to a building,
It's
exactly.
tied to
Okay.
a building, it's not just, you know, a private parking
not
lot.
no, I
standalone.
understand that, yeah,
But if you don't want buildings taken down on Main Street, make your regulations say that.
mhm,
And it shouldn't be, it should be contiguous.
right, of course,
Well, that's not on this agenda tonight. so.
right.
Good point, though, thank
And
you.
that's come up before, historically, yeah.
Okay, any other comments before we close public hearing on it? And we'll need a motion to close
Motion to close public hearing
Second,
24
24-10-2.
second,
Okay, any comments on the motion? All in favor? Okay. I did move the decision part of this to the next item on the agenda. But just in the future, when we have this, if we have,
I'll have a clean copy with yes.
it just makes sense because this is all over the place. All right, so we need to add to this, we've got a draft motion, but we've got some issues that were brought up by the COG, and so who wants to address this?
What do we want to put in there first?
Well-
Yeah, I think we
All right, let's see.
need to address all
well,
of them
you-
except.
couldn't
for-
you say simply
With
that
the
it,
exception of the waiver. I think we should just leave it.
In
at
3 to
that.
6.
Include the waiver information from the COG.
There's-
well, and also,
To
and
include all
also the,
recommendations.
Recommendation.
3 and 6 of the how parking spaces are defined and regulated when they, we don't have, do we have language for that, Rista? What they're recommending in the first part, how parking space is defined and regulated when they total between 3 and 6
I
spaces?
didn't see anything.
I think the question is because it really should be 1 to 5 is that first set, and then 6 to 35 is the next for the kick-in. The 1 to 5 is really not even, it's just a parking area. It's not considered
Hey,
small or
George,
large.
do we need to see this again at the next meeting with the things incorporated properly?
Well, it
It's
should
the
be. I
motion.
mean, I don't like this with all
I-
the
well,
lines through it. That's just
We
kinda
need a proper
complicated.
motion that's going into a record that changes the rules, so I think we have to have that in front of us and not potchkeyed with,
No, and I agree with you. I agree with you. We've
I
been
think-
talking about this for a couple of years, so let's get it
Let
right.
me make a motion to table the approval.
there's a motion on the table, so
So we have to
you
rescind.
can
it
withdraw,
wasn't-
you can withdraw
No,
that
there was
motion.
no motion. It wasn't read.
It wasn't seconded.
It
Okay,
wasn't.
I seconded it, but I would
It did, but no, was no action.
repeal it, yes.
Make a motion to table PZC 24-10-2 zoning regulation amendment, Town of Winchester for parking lots, to our next meeting in November 25th. And until we get a good revised copy from the town planner, complete.
And in a type that's readable, so it's
Yeah, a
not
little
this
larger
little
would be helpful.
Including the revisions from the
for
COG.
the COG. Can we do that?
Absolutely. The one thing, though, is that section C, construction of new site facilities, including but not limited to parking areas containing more than 3 parking spaces. Rista, I'm assuming you grabbed that right from our existing regulation?
Well, yeah, we didn't want to change that, because we didn't want people to have to come in for a site plan.
No,
for-
but should it be 1 to 5, and then 5 to,
Or 6 to,
or, I'm sorry, 6 to 35 would be the next threshold? Because I'm wondering if that needs to be changed in the current regulations then.
well, we're only changing what we've got with regards to this.
So in
Right now.
the site plan requirements, that's section C. We currently, want a site plan for 3 or more parking spaces. I didn't think we wanted to change that requirement, so it still would have to come in. If we wanted it to be for small and large scale only, we can change it, but that, we didn't discuss that.
Yeah. So I think that's what Rob was trying to ask, though, between, so would that literally be 3 to 5 parking spaces would be considered
Just the parking area, that's what we
parking area?
have.
Does it need a separate definition?
So no, no
And I
site
thought that we had,
plan
I thought we had put that in the regulations, that a parking area was up to, instead of 5 or more, it was up to 6, or up to 5.
Yeah.
Present regulations, parking area is an area other than the street used for the parking of 5 or more vehicles.
And I thought we had changed that
That's what present parking
to
regulation is.
up to 5.
Okay. That makes it a little cleaner then. We can get rid of that.
Motion, right?
Yes, but that doesn't say
Is that,
that.
you have
Okay.
that in? Yeah, we've got a motion, and seconded by John. And, so was that a modification that you were suggesting? Krista?
Krista?
Well, to table it, or to?
No, it's,
Yeah,
it's.
yeah, I
include
think that the parking area was up to 5, then you had the small scale, and then you had the large
Amend my
scale.
motion to include that, 1 to 5, and 6 to 35.
Yes. Yes.
Second. Second,
We're all on
okay.
the same.
Any other discussion of the motion? All in favor? All right, so you've got clearly what we need to have
You'll have
at
a
the next
clean
meeting?
copy by email. Yes.
Got a month.
Thank you.
Before our meeting.
Yes.
All right. The next public hearing is
Oh.
P's
There is a draft motion though. Do you wanna,
draft
sign
motion
that?
on what?
No,
for the
'cause-
parking
No, we
regulations
didn't
or?
approve
No,
it.
we're
Oh, okay.
Table it until the
Okay.
next meeting.
Got it.
Continuing it to the
We
next
want to have
meeting.
the whole thing
Got
written so that we can read it and it's clear and no lined out or anything. All right, the second public hearing is a new one, PZC 24-11 zoning regulation. Amendment, applicant attorney Joseph Hammer on behalf of Nova Farms, Wallace. How do you pronounce the last name?
Odiera?
Odier. Jason Teal, CEO. Proposal applicant seeks to amend the zoning regulations to allow outdoor grow cannabis cultivation use by special permit in the production and innovation PI zone district. Before we get started on this, first of all, I'm gonna ask Lance to read the notices that were published. The other thing is, anybody that wants to speak, I want to limit it to about 3 minutes each, if you can do that. And if there's somebody that's already said what you're concerned about, don't repeat it. We've got enough to, once it's brought up. And so no repetition of other statements. We need your name and address for the record when it comes in. We're not going to go beyond 9 o'clock tonight. I anticipate we're going to have some issues raised that we're going to have to get answers for. So we will, without going through the whole thing tonight and then, thinking it's going to be closed, we're going to continue this into the 25th of November planning and zoning meeting, because this is a change from what we've got in our regulations now with regards to this information. And so that's how we're going to proceed. Can you tell us what the notices have been, please?
Yes. Notice is hereby given that the Winchester Planning and Zoning Commission will hold a public hearing, 7:00 PM on Monday, October 28th, 2024, in the P. Francis Hicks Room, second floor, Town Hall, 338 Main Street, Winston. To act on the following, PZC number 24-11, zoning regulation amendment, applicant attorney Joseph Hammer on behalf of Nova Farms, Wallace, sorry, Wallace, and Jason Teal, CEO. Proposal, applicant seeks to amend the zoning regulations to allow outdoor grow cannabis cultivation use by special permit in the production and innovation zoning district. At this hearing, interested persons may appear and be heard, and written communication will be received. Copies of the above proposals are on file for public inspection in the Planning and Community Development Office. This was dated dated at Winchester, October 10th. George Clausen, chairman, was run on October 18th and on October 25th.
You got any comments from anybody there? You got some stuff from the COG.
have the COG comments again, and I included Willie's email from last meeting. Yeah, thank you, I have it somewhere.
All right, well, this should be all read into the record so that everybody hears it. So if there's
Okay.
questions and it's answered here,
Would
please.
you like any particular order?
Let's do Willie's, this was set on the September 29th.
So Commissioner Platt wrote on Sunday, September 29th, 2024, to myself and Chair, I will not be able to attend Monday's special meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission. This was last meeting, previous commitment. I believe the potential change to the cannabis regulations in the PI zone should also be applied to the RR zone, which is the rural residential, with a restriction in both on how many commercial cannabis outdoor growers are allowed in town. I know cannabis is not considered a farming crop and needs special regulations. If the zoning regulations were applied to only the P&I zone, production and innovation, a zoning change would required for the proposed cannabis grow property. If they were no longer growing cannabis on that property, another change back to the RR zone would be necessary if the property was then to be used for its most likely best use, housing parentheses. This board has resisted spot zoning in the past and this change would only open the door for it in the future. Thank you, Commissioner Platt. And the second correspondence is from COG. Okay, so this is from Robert Phillips, Executive Director, is dated October 21st, sent to me. And they received it on September 19th, and for today's hearing date, they wanted to have their response by October 19th, which they met. The town of Winchester has submitted a proposed amendment to the zoning regulations to add outdoor cannabis cultivation to the production and innovation zone by special permit. COG staff has reviewed your proposal amendments and offers the following for consideration by the commission. The commission should consider additional The commission should consider additional vegetative screening requirements if warranted for areas where the 12-foot fencing would be visible to roadways or adjacent properties / sensitive receptors. Further, it should be noted that even if the commission were to rule favorably on this proposal, final approval lies within the Department of Consumer Protection. Otherwise, the staff of the Northwest Hills Council of Governments finds no apparent conflict with the regional plans or policies or the concerns of the adjacent towns. I do want to note that was posted, our regulation was posted not only in our town clerk's office, but the town of Barkhamsted and the town of Colebrook.
Any other comments from any staff people here? Were there any other comments?
Oh, I'm sorry,
from anybody?
not for this, no, it'll be the next phase.
So who would like to make a presentation of what is being proposed? I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
I just have a question. Last meeting, we were told that this public comment periods, that it would be in the Republican American 10 days before the meeting, and also there would be a sign on the farm. I live across from the farm. There has been no sign ever on that piece of property. And as for the Republican American, I have scoured that newspaper for 2 weeks. I've been reading the obituaries, the birds, you name it, advertisements, there's nothing in there about this meeting.
So you just read what you had
Yeah,
published.
so that,
I did see it in the Waterbury Republican, at least
Okay.
2 of the 3 dates that you noted, because I noted that. It was in the legal notices for town of Winchester. Yes.
All right, but you saw no signs on the property?
Well, there wouldn't be, this is just
Not
a
yet.
regulation change.
Right.
right,
Did you look in the legal notices section, ma'am?
Yeah, I've been looking at the whole thing for
Well,
3 days.
but, I mean, we have commission members who saw it in the paper, and the planner says it was put in there, so
What about the sign on the road?
it doesn't need a sign at this point.
That's what we were told.
No, I don't think we mentioned the sign last time.
No.
We didn't, this commission didn't, I don't know who told you that, but we didn't say that at the last meeting that you attended.
Okay. Who are you and,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. My name is Attorney Joseph Hammer. I'm with the law firm of McDermott, Reynolds, and Glissman, 86.
Yeah, is that microphone on?
It is on.
Can you hear me now? Better? Okay. Attorney Joseph Hammer. I'm with the law firm of McDermott, Reynolds, and Glissman, 86 Farmington Avenue, Hartford. And I'm here representing the applicant, Nova Farms, Connecticut. To my right is Wallace Noguera of Nova. As you know from the notices, we have applied to amend your zoning regulations to add a new cannabis cultivation use category to your PI zoning district specifically. The proposed use would be allowed by special permit. It would be added to section 4D of the regulations governing cannabis establishments, and it would also add a definition of cannabis cultivator to your definitions in section 5. A cannabis cultivation facility would open up outdoor cultivation, which your current regulations do not provide for. Cultivation is permitted only indoors, and the proposed regulation would also allow ancillary greenhouse or hoop house as well, and trailer for office areas. There are a variety of restrictions and requirements which are built into the draft regulations in order to avoid impacts to any adjacent area. For example, a minimum lot size of 30 acres, fencing around the perimeter of the facility at a minimum of 12 feet in height, lighting, video surveillance, and locks at all access points to the facility, use of shielded and downward cast lighting, and a maximum of 250,000 square feet of total grow space, which would be the total of outdoor and any greenhouse areas as well. And again, I want to just stress it's limited to the PI district, the zone in which this commission previously allowed other cannabis uses, which are limited to that zone. And I want to also emphasize it's allowed only by special permit, which, as you know, gives you a very comprehensive and thorough review of any particular site for the use, and you can determine the suitability of a particular site and a particular site plan on a case-by-case basis, considering the characteristics of the property, the adjacent area, and as I said, a specific site plan. We believe there would be numerous potential benefits to the town to add the proposed use category to the PI zoning district. Starting with the fact that the commission has deemed it appropriate to allow certain cannabis uses in that zone that are already in the regulations. Outdoor cultivation, which would be allowed under this amendment, is an agricultural activity in keeping with the character of the town and the historic and existing farming and agriculture activity within the town. And if you have any questions on that aspect of things, there's someone from the client who's well-versed in outdoor cultivation who could answer any questions you might have. But I would also mention non-cannabis agricultural use farms as well as commercial greenhouses and nurseries are currently permitted in the PI zone, and we believe the cannabis cultivation use is also consistent with that. Wanted to also note that we did not specifically propose a separate parking requirement for the proposed cultivation use because we believe that the way you've, in your existing regs, addressed parking in the context of farming uses would be appropriate here as well, and that's essentially that there are no set parking requirements, and I think that's in large part because you're dealing with an outdoor seasonal use, no large buildings of any kind, and for many, many months of the year, the agricultural use site is going to be dormant during winter weather. And again, you would have an opportunity if someone comes in with an application to provide this use on a particular property to see a site plan, how they're handling all the different aspects of the use. We think there could also be economic benefit to the town by allowing the use. There could be local employment opportunities of this type of use, and it would be a commercial use with all the spillover benefits that can come from that as well. Importantly, all without public access to the facility and the type of traffic generation that can come from a commercial use that has public access, whether it's a retail use or a restaurant use or an office use, any of those types of things. It would also further the preservation of agricultural and farmland in town, again, while furthering this type of commercial development. We believe the proposal is also consistent with your town plan of conservation and development, in that it would further agricultural type use, the preservation of agricultural land, provide local economic benefits and employment opportunities, and again, not in a way that generates any material level of traffic, because it's basically just the employees who would be present at the facility as needed. We also believe the proposed amendments are in accord with your comprehensive plan as reflected in your zoning regulations and your zoning map, given the nature of uses currently permitted in the PI zone. So for all those reasons, we think it would be appropriate to allow the use. I just wanted to briefly comment on the COG comment about you might want to consider under certain cases additional screening depending on visibility and sensitive receptors. I think that's certainly something that you could appropriately address in an actual special permit and site plan application where you're dealing with a particular site and you can determine if there are any sensitive receptors or conditions warranting additional vegetative buffering. But I think it would make sense to do that in that context as opposed to trying to write something into the regulations generally that would apply everywhere. And I would also just stress the finding by COG of no apparent conflict with regional plans or policies or concerns of adjacent towns. And finally, this is a highly regulated use by the state of Connecticut. So when it comes to things like security, access, handling of materials, transport of materials, et cetera, the state imposes regulations which any operator of this type of facility would have to comply with. They've got to be licensed by the state. They're monitored by the state as well. So that's the gist of what we're proposing. And again, currently while we're proposing is an amendment to regulations, and as you've indicated, there is no actual site application pending
Did
before
you
you.
add the P and I part of it because we've already got, there's something in our regulations with regards to P and I? Or did you, because that would require, with the piece you're looking at, a zone change up there?
Yeah, correct. We are, the client is, I would say, very experienced in, in different states in terms of cultivation uses. And yes, they have been looking at a site. It would require a rezoning to the PI. And again, not to get into the particulars of what's not before you, but that site happens to be.
I'm just curious why it was added on.
Yeah, that site happens to be adjacent to a PI. And again, I think importantly, PI, is the district that you put cannabis uses in to begin with. So it seemed that utilizing the PI zone to do that would be consistent with what you've done in the past in terms of where to put cannabis. And then, I think an application in the future would either have to come in on something already zoned PI, or something that you choose to rezone to PI.
Is that it? Why don't we get questions from the audience? Everybody came in, I'm sure, for this. So let's try to keep it to, if we can, 3-minute limitations, not repeat somebody else's statement of a concern, and so we can move it along. And remember that once we've cleared everybody's had an opportunity to contribute, that we can add more to it if we need to, but we're going to continue this until the 25th of November. So with that in mind, who would like to start?
Would you like us to leave the table while people are speaking?
Whatever
Yeah.
because we'd like to get whoever's speaking in the
sure.
microphone, so, yes, thank you.
We're gonna have discussion.
Yeah, oh, yeah, yeah. I just thought that we'd be better to get public input. Yes.
Candace Bouchard, 135 Riverton Road. We already have an issue in our PI zone that the town's not addressing, 102 Grappo, which was sold to be a 5,000 square foot building, was supposed to be built in the industrial park, and it was never done, and the town's not doing anything about it. And it looks like Fred Flintstone is the entrance to the prettiest industrial park that we have. So how are we, that's an issue we have that has absolutely nothing to do with them. It's, we're not even maintaining or making people who are purchasing properties there held accountable for what we voted for.
We did in fact address that, and we were told that there was an extension of the time available on the original approval because of COVID. So Lance, you brought that up. How many years does he have before it?
Had 9, so I'm not sure when they applied, when town originally
Well,
applied.
this
but
is something that she's got a good point made.
he still has time on his permit. The
Well,
short
why
answer,
don't we look at it to be clear
Yep.
that it's not overlooked?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
we're been in conversation.
That's my concern,
I
is
agree.
that we're not,
We already
taking
looked
care
at
of-
that. We brought him in here, and then we were told that there was a change in how much time they had available to do something. So I agree with you.
and if we have a PI zone change, are we planning on,
We're not talking
Expanding-
about that yet.
no, okay, thank you.
If we do something, consider that, we'll have a public hearing and be discussing it again. Okay. Who would like to speak next?
Hi, Jen Perga, 378 East Wakefield. I just have a question about lighting, as we get more and more development in town, and this is an area that's, completely rural, and there's a lot of talk now about dark skies and bird migration, and the latest recommendations are to have motion sensor lighting. I don't know if that's possible in a facility like this, but you're going from an area that is probably completely dark to something that's gonna be lit up, and I'm just wondering if there are other possibilities for that.
Thank you for bringing that up. That's, we'll ask the applicant to talk about the hours of operation that they, from planting to harvesting, and how that fits into the, the year schedule.
Hey, Jen, what's your point about the motion sensor part? Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, because then the lights aren't on all night, so if someone did come to try to breach the fence or something, then all the lights go on and the cameras work or whatever, but the lights aren't on all the time.
Okay. We'll ask that when we get finished with questions then. Okay, who else would like to speak, please? This is an opportunity to bring up questions that we can get answers to before we start, really deliberating on this.
Brian Dwyer. I live at 130 Old Robertsville Road. Guess I'd be the closest person to this proposed development. I have a 2-year-old at home. We try to walk past that house, but now there's a feral cat situation going on there. We got a kitten recently. The authorities have been alerted. So I just don't see any benefit to the town for this. I mean, we could have had a dispensary that would have brought in actual revenue, actual jobs, not just seasonal employment behind a 12-foot tall fence, lit up like New York City. Right now, I look at that field and I see deer, turkey. I hear owls at night, crickets. I see the moon and the stars and my son. I'd like that to continue. I mean, would you like this on Lovely Street? Hey Troy, you want this off of 263? No, I didn't think so. I know Todd Archulowski doesn't want it by his house either. And where does this stop? Is there a tax benefit to the town? What if they get a couple goats? Is it now exempt? These are real questions, real concerns. I'd like some real answers. I'd like a knock on my door saying, hey, we're planning on putting this in your neighborhood. What do you think about it?
That's what we're doing tonight.
This isn't my house.
This is the place where we can discuss
That's
those
a
things.
neighborly, gentlemanly thing to do. I mean, poor old lady, sorry for calling her an old lady, but my neighbor back here has a beautiful view from her beautiful home. What about her house value? You know what I mean? Who's gonna wanna buy that house, looking at a 12-foot tall chain link fence? Is there barbed wire on top? Is it electrified? Like, good luck. Are my 3 minutes up? It's just my future and my home value.
No,
My son we're
that's why
talking
we're doing
about.
this. And if you have
Yeah,
more to
I
continue
mean-
to contribute later, just, you're welcome to do so.
I think I can save the rest for the next meeting. You guys have a good night.
Thank you.
Anybody else have a comment or questions with regards to this? Yes, ma'am.
Sandy Slemmer, 45 Taylor Road, Barkhamsted. Although the town line goes through the middle of my house. So the front of it's in Barkhamsted, the back of it's in Winstead. So consequently, I'm right across the street from the Rebelard Farm. So, and I live directly across from it. I've enjoyed the view of the fields for 25 years. Ruth and I spoke, Ruth Rebelard, we spoke on a daily basis. The farm had been in the family since 1904 and became the focal point of the community for decades. Ruth originally had a herd of dairy cows along with hay fields and other vegetable gardens. She was known in the whole area as family members hayed the fields many miles from her farm. The county relied on her services. She was important to the farming community. Nova talks at great lengths about this minimum of 12-foot high fence that will shield the fields from the public, and this is supposed to be a good thing. In the past, people would stop along Old Robertsville Road and just sit there to enjoy the open space. I even talked to a woman one time. I think that people are sick and tired of fences. You're destroying a simple pleasure for so many people. No more views of the hills. Sunsets are blocked by the fence. I have heard repeatedly from new homeowners who have moved here because of the farm. They're always concerned what would happen to it. Would it remain open and free or gone for development? They want it open and free. That's why they moved there. Particularly during COVID, people flocked to the outdoors. It was a reprieve from the household mess that they were living in. It was their release from the COVID pressure. And now you constantly hear how important it is for people to get outside. No child left inside is the familiar motto. State parks and forests had increased visitors. Nature was their bright spot in the darkest of times. You talk about equity and think you're hiring 12 to 15 people is giving back to the community. I think a mowed walking path through the field with benches would be far more advantageous to all people. A place to watch nature and meditate, a calming place to push away life stress. There is so little open space left, we have to preserve it and use it wisely for all people, not just a few. Developers are desperate. I recently got a letter from somebody offering to buy my 2.1 acres for a given price. It took me a while to figure out what they were talking about. It turns out that it was my septic field. okay? So you look at Winchester, and it just shows an open space. So they figure that was 2 acres, and they could use that for development. That's how bad it's getting. We've got to stop this. Wildlife are very important to the residents of the area. Talk to anyone, and usually a wildlife viewing will come up. I've seen moose disappear into the forest, a female porcupine teaching her little one to climb a tree, a mink on a stone wall, and encounter a very friendly bear, mine are friendly, gorgeous coyotes on a knoll on Ruth's Field, and of course birds all over the place. And it just goes on and on and on. You know, like Brian was talking about turkeys and everything else you can think of. Let's see here. There's no,
Excuse me, that, you've exceeded the 3.
did I? Okay, I figured I would. Okay,
Come back the next time.
yeah. Well, I tried to talk fast, but I'm not good enough.
No, well, thank you, you've shown concern.
Jen Kresge, I'm a resident of Barkhamsted, I live right across the street from Sandy. To be more beneficial to the local community and beyond, the greatest thing to do is not change the zoning. Preserving this property for the good of the community, for peace, meditation, and simple relaxation is the best use for everyone, not just a few. Think about what you are throwing away before you allow this to happen. Once to say yes, you permanently throw away nature at its best and leave the neighborhood less than what it would be. We don't need marijuana, we need to preserve a little space for reflection and peace of mind, and keep the character of the town. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody have any additional comments or questions with regards to this? Okay, if the applicant could just answer the operational part of this, as far as lighting and how you would do it, you know, start of the process, when you'd start the planting, when you'd start harvesting, so we know, you know, what time of year we're operating in, and what kind of lighting might be necessary for security, et cetera.
Yes, Mr. And I'm gonna turn it over to Zach. To Zach Allen from Nova, who's very experienced in terms of generally, you know, cultivation, outdoor cultivation operations. But as I turn it over to him, my understanding is I believe they do use motion detectors. I don't believe lights are left on all night. They're triggered if somebody in the middle of the night were to walk by. But you know, you can, Zach, if you could just quickly introduce yourself.
Well, this isn't an application for the
Correct.
use, so that we're
Correct.
just trying to get an understanding of how you
Yes.
function there.
So really, I think what you're asking him to do and what he will do is speak generally, you know, not to a specific
Right.
site, but just how these facilities,
Good.
these types work.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Zach Allen. First and foremost, thank you for your time and consideration. It's very much so appreciated. To touch on some of the concerns that were laid out, number one, we want to make sure that the property.
Excuse me, could everybody hear?
No, I can't even hear.
No.
Gotcha.
Zach, lift that
Yeah.
up.
Sorry, thank you.
There you
Not
go.
too used to the microphones. Fresh off the farm. So we certainly want to maintain the beautification of any property that we encounter. You know, planting natural, native plants, flowers, things like that, trees around the property is something certainly we want to add, but we also want to preserve the farm image. We oftentimes have livestock at our farms. You know, we have a lot of Highland cattle, as well as pigs and chickens and goats. You know, that was certainly mentioned before by a gentleman, but we also want to make sure we preserve the property overall and maintain, you know, the natural farmland aesthetic. That's extremely important to us. As far as the fence goes, no, there's certainly no barbed wire. The cameras are night vision enabled, even thermal, so the only lights that will be on would be motion censored and triggered. The plants themselves are actually photosensitive, so any excess light at night will actually cause problems during their flowering cycle. So we want it actually as dark as possible in the evening. Mostly we want to be good community partners and good neighbors. Ultimately, we are traditional farm, or a traditional farm, and we become very boring very quickly. And I understand that there's certainly a fear of the unknown. It's new, and there's not a lot of people who have come into close proximity of it, so there's a lot of unknown questions. And, you know, when people do look into it and they do watch us very closely, they very quickly become bored. We plant our plants with the tractor, we irrigate our fields such as any other traditional farmer, and we are seasonal. So we have a peak season, and other than that, we are very quiet. We tend to the animals. The last text I got from my employee was, "The cow's water's still on, should I shut it off?"
So when do you start the process, what time of year?
So the plants will go out in the late spring, and they will typically reach their maturation point in the late summer, and then into the early fall. That's typically the
So is it
cycle.
done this time of year?
Yes, we are actually wrapping up harvest right now.
Have you encountered any kind of, a couple of our members have gone up to your closest facility, and there's no odor coming from this growth that you're planting until your harvesting time. That's what I've understood anyways. Is that the case?
Yes, during the vegetative stage, there is virtually no smell. Even if you were to come into contact with the plant, there's no resin glands present. The resin glands are only produced during their flowering cycle.
And how do you, once it becomes harvestable, how does it proceed? What do you do with it?
So typically, it will either be harvested for flour or for extraction grade material. Extraction grade material, which is what we produce a lot of outdoors, is actually fresh frozen, and it is frozen immediately to preserve the terpenes. Terpenes are what makes things smell. It's what makes lemons smell. Limonene is actually the terpene that creates that. It also gives cannabis a citrusy scent as well. That's a volatile compound, so it'll burn off. It's what dissipates that smell out into the air. When we freeze it, it actually traps it in place. And once it's frozen, it remains frozen and in a frozen state until it is transferred to a manufacturing facility.
And you do that right on site?
No, we only cultivate on this site. Manufacturing will not be
So
co-located.
you cut it and then haul it?
Oh, sorry, we will be freezing on site. We will not be extracting on site. What was that?
So you don't freeze it on site?
We do freeze it on site. We don't extract it on
How
site.
big of a facility do you use on the site? Because what are you planning to,
Well, that's now their,
I'm-
that's now into their application, no?
I think we're
Yeah.
trying to get an understanding
I
of how
understand
they
the
function.
process, yeah.
So how do you know, how much capacity do you need to have in order to freeze this with your harvesting?
They can typically be contained in freezer trailers, and those are on site. They are typically the size of Connex boxes. And for those of you who may be unfamiliar with what a Connex is, it's like a shipping container. So very small footprint, certainly no large buildings or anything like that.
Do these things stay on site all the time?
Yes.
What other structures do you require for this operation?
I believe they were mentioned previously, and it would just be an office trailer, hoop houses. That's for the most part it. You know, when we've had regulators come at our other sites, they ask where our main production is, and I just motion towards the field. We plant in the dirt, grow under the sun. So as traditional as possible.
All right, go ahead.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, correct me if I'm wrong, Zach, but I think under the Connecticut regulations, the cultivation area itself, as well as the freeze trailers and so forth, and the greenhouses would all be within the fenced area, is that
Yes,
correct? Okay.
absolutely.
All right. Okay. With the additional information, does anybody else have any questions from the audience? Sir? Yes, sir. Yeah, thank you.
name is Thomas Chappelle. I live at 25 Taylor Road. And one of my concerns is fertilization of the crop. My property is almost abutting the upper field where this grow is going to occur. And my concern is contamination of the well, my well water. Other concerns I had have already been covered, so that's all I have for now.
Well, that's a very important issue. So we'll have them come back and tell us how that will be planned to be used.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I got another one real quick. I do notice that there is swampland right next to here, very close as well to the Still River, which filters into the Farmington, as we all know. What kind of water control measures are there for runoff? There's no parking lot, there's Connex boxes, getting a lot of mixed signals here. I mean, there should be catch basins, a 100-year water event, which happens every 20 years now. What kind of stuff is going on here? Is this going in front of inland wetlands, which it definitely should be in regards to the swamp area?
This is a regulation, a suggestion to.
Right, now I'm
modify.
suggesting,
Yeah, no, I understand,
Right.
it's a good point.
you know,
Good
and
point.
the gentleman behind me just brought up the fertilization process. How is that affected in the nearby wells and rivers and waterways?
Okay,
That's all I got
thank you.
for this meeting. See you soon.
Again, if you could explain, you know, the types of fertilization, if any, fertilizers that you use, and the questions that were raised generally as to this type of facility, wherever it is, here, Connecticut or elsewhere. Thank you.
Those are great questions. First and foremost, we do not use any pesticides whatsoever. We do not use any pesticides whatsoever. We are legally not allowed to. We've actually, in any market whatsoever. So we have crafted our operations around not using any pesticides. I want to make that abundantly clear that we do not use any pesticides whatsoever. As far as fertilization goes, we fertilize as minimally as possible. It is expensive, so if we were to have an excess runoff, that would, one, be very wasteful. Two, we are within contained raised beds. We formulate the fertilization program to be as infrequent as possible, for just enough for the plants to uptake those nutrients. We certainly don't dump it and set it and forget it. We have a very strict regimented plan that introduces a fertilizer slowly throughout the growth cycle, and then we monitor the plant's growth, and we're always catching up to them, never fertilizing in excess. We have not seen at this point any runoff that has damaged anything surrounding our existing properties.
Are you required to monitor that? Or that's just something your practice?
It is our practice, absolutely. Some states do require it, some do not. We still take it upon ourselves to make sure we're doing.
Connecticut does not?
Okay,
meant-
I'm unfamiliar.
Okay.
But we soil test every year and we water test every year. We have not seen any contamination. We are actually tested for additional contaminants. Cannabis is one of the most highly regulated and tested products, I would say, agricultural products, even if it's not federally recognized or recognized by the state as an agricultural product. It still is. It's a plant grown in the ground. But it is tested for pesticides. It's tested for heavy metals in excess. And if it is above a very, very low threshold, it will actually fail the state testing. So for us to introduce an excess amount of fertilizer, we would actually start to see a buildup of contaminants, which in that case would typically be heavy metals. So, yes, go
Well,
ahead.
two things. What kind of fertilizer do you use? And did you say something about raised beds? If you did, what did you say?
Yes, raised beds. So those are created with a tractor. So we pull, yes, we pull behind an attachment that forms the beds. Yes, and the plants are planted in those beds. So they're not typically, wood-walled structures. We may build, wooden raised beds, traditional raised beds inside the greenhouses, but in the fields, it's created by the tractor. And what type of fertilizer we use? We use an organic synthetic blend. And that is a salt base that we mix in with our water, and then we control exactly when and how much we're feeding at any given point in time.
Good.
Yeah, I did visit your site in Sheffield twice, just so the public's aware, you will be drilling a well, because you need water for these things, and you store that in tanks. So that's where you'll be getting your water from, so you're not gonna contaminate your own well, I assume. Everything I saw with the raised beds, all the fertilizer and water for the plants are injected into the dirt. Everything is buried, it's not applied to the top, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
And it's all applied to the root zone. There are backflow
Okay, I mean,
preventers.
that's what I saw, I just
Yes.
wanted to bring it out to the public.
It's not broadcasted.
No, it's not
But you have
broadcast,
both.
it's actually in the soil next to the plants,
Yes,
in the raised beds.
yes, correct.
That's their practice, right? So one company-specific practice versus an industry.
Or a regulation requirement.
Right.
So when you lay out your raised beds, do you take into consideration the runoff that would happen during a heavy rain to keep it from exiting the property, your layouts?
Yes, that's certainly designed in how we, will grade the field, pitch the field. We don't want an excessive runoff. It's a blessing and a curse having an outdoor grow. When we get rain, we typically don't have to water. Depending on the soil composition and how well it holds, that will typically have us decide how we are grading the field, pitching the field, and then if we're putting any stops for any erosion or anything like that. We want to keep the dirt where it is. The plants also help with that. If you think of sand dunes and the grass that grows there prevents that natural erosion, the root zone will also naturally prevent that as well.
This is all new for Connecticut.
It's a new industry. We certainly don't want to be viewed as cowboys. And in the Wild West, we want to be partners of the community and also of the regulators. And
We were early on to create a regulation that we first went to the selectmen to see if they were interested in it. But we've got buildings, the way we structured obviously our approval.
Could you give a technical description of your fencing? I wasn't able to visit your site, so I don't
Yes.
know what kind of fencing they use, but there was a question about fencing, so.
Yes, absolutely. So once again, no barbed wire, no guard towers, no giant floodlights that are on all night. Unfortunately, the minimum state requirement is 12 feet. However, we typically add in a green privacy screen that will blend in with the natural environment. We have elected, it's not required at any of our sites, but we have elected to plant arborvitaes and other trees and shrubs around the fence to, again, help it blend in, and also just natural native flowers. We typically have bees at our farms and introduce, usually a half dozen to a dozen hives, so we want to make sure there's a lot of flowers for them to pollinate.
Do you foresee on this site that you're proposing, and if, any requirement that may come down from wetlands or your engineers that you'll have to have a sedimentation pond or anything to retain any of the runoff before it does
Yes,
reach any of the wetlands areas?
so I believe, if you want to just chime in. Sure, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, we realize you have a 75-foot upland review from wetlands and 100 from water courses, so when we come in with a plan, I think we intend to stay away from the wetlands, just to partially answer your question, but.
Yeah, I was just asking for the neighbors, for the people that are here tonight to get the information.
We would follow all, uniform construction code and make sure that we are far, not only far enough away, but giving us an ample buffer for, any access outside the gates.
A lot of that stuff would come in a special permit here in regards to the site development.
Just because the people are here, I was asking that question, that's all, just so
Yeah,
to
I
bring
think
it out.
that's more what we're trying to do, is get a better feeling of how you plan to farm this. Christie?
So hi, so for the record, I wanted to just note that I am a city planner, and there's been a lot of talk tonight about the specifics of your company and your practices and a proposed site, but when we look at regulations, it is, we approve the use, not the company or the end user. And, my biggest concern with outdoor recreation, outdoor grow, I do believe that retail, there are a lot of benefits for it. I do believe indoor grow, that we've seen a lot of benefits, but they've been vetted over many years, and when they were first starting anew, there was a lot of challenges, right? With cash and with parking and all of these different challenges, and over time, they've worked themselves out and solutions have come. One of the biggest challenges right now with outdoor growing is the smell. And I know that there's some smell, but you microfreeze it and it takes that smell away rather quickly. But because this is a regulation that doesn't apply to you and to your practices, smell is still a major concern of mine because there could be other users that don't use that same method and that same process. So, from an industry standpoint, are you seeing changes where freezing or measures to mitigate smell are going to be required by the state, or is it really just up to the individual user as to how are they going to manage that?
That's a great question. I would actually like to address the outdoor odor versus the indoor odor. It's typically the indoor grows that will stink up a neighborhood. And that's because that smell is concentrated. It's ultra concentrated within that structure. And then once it inevitably seeps out, it's going to permeate throughout the area. Outdoors, as I'm sure the individuals who visited the farm can attest that it's an open air environment, so that smell just naturally dissipates. There are certain barriers, whether it's vegetative barriers or even the fence, where it just naturally will stop. The odor that would potentially start to drift. Typically on humid days, if there were to be a smell, the odor could cling to that, but it really just naturally dissipates into the air. It would be, similar to like a pepper field being grown. You're typically not going to smell much unless the peppers are overripened and rotting in the field, which is obviously not what we're going to do. But then to have a pepper plant who's processing the peppers, you're going to get a very pungent smell. So as far as odor mitigation, outdoors versus indoors, the outdoor crop typically has a lesser impact on the odor in the area. And I know I get a lot of questions about that, and there's a lot of skepticism around that, but it is the honest truth.
So I just will note for the record too, I know that members who have visited your site did not have a smell, but I know the other growing plant in Connecticut, and I've talked to people around there and driven by that, and I know that odor does permeate up to a half mile or a mile away, depending on smell. So I do think that the smell is really dictated by the way that it's managed on the site. And I do have concerns over a regulation where that smell isn't regulated by the state or some other agency in putting these regulations in place. So.
I would also add that, and sorry, was that an indoor or outdoor cultivator?
Outdoor.
Okay. It is also seasonal in how we're producing. So if there were to be a smell and it would be, protruding into the area, it would typically be for a very short amount of time, and like you had mentioned during the harvest stages. And that's also why it's a good, option to vet the individuals coming into your community and making sure you're picking a good partner.
I got a question on product and innovation. Did you guys review our zoning map for product innovation? There's only one parcel that's above 30 acres, and that's a quarry, right? And so, and I gotta ask, like, the typical soil required for cannabis growing would be from like a farm, right? Rural residential areas. What? Yeah. Why did you choose product innovation, and why not rural residential? Which is the farm soils you're after?
Again, I think part of our thinking was that it's the PI zone that already has cannabis uses to begin with, and that it would be a simpler exercise if you're adding a use to put it in the zone that you've already taken a lot of time and care to define, how other cannabis uses are going to work, and they're all in that zone. So I think we were, again, feeling that it was simpler to do it that way than to open it up to a different zone. And again, if we're talking about a future particular property, I think it would also be important to us that that property would be appropriate, to rezone to PI based on proximity et cetera. But
Yeah.
we just felt, that it was sort of the most comfortable way to work with what you've already created in that zone and just supplement it with this one use, because you've already got whatever, 3 or 4 several cannabis-related uses in that particular zoning district already.
I think indoor cannabis, micro cannabis, was driven there for its infrastructure requirements,
Okay.
right? And if we were to approve these regulations today, right? And you were to get the zoning change of that property of desire, that basically gives you exclusive growing rights in the town of Winchester. No one else can grow because there's no other suitable properties in the production innovation district.
Well, I think you said there's one that's over 30 acres, and again, I think
It's a quarry.
the 30, the 30 acres, again, I think was really, from our standpoint, it was suggested just, again, to basically, make it have to be a larger site from the standpoint of, with a larger site, you're not utilizing the entire site, you've got room for buffer, et cetera. But it would be, to do this type of operation on a 30-acre site versus a 5-acre site, I don't even know if it's feasible on a 5-acre site, probably not. But it was just felt that might also make the commission more comfortable, the public more comfortable, that if you do make this change, you're not gonna see, a dozen facilities like this coming in for a dozen different properties, but that was really the rationale for it.
You say a buffer too,
Yep.
but in the proposed language, it says the 200 feet boundary line of any residential zone does not apply to outdoor cannabis.
Correct,
So that's,
and
you're
part of it-
saying waive the buffer zone.
Well, no, part of, again, our reading of that buffer zone is certainly, I know commissions are very careful with those buffer zones when it comes to, for example, a retail dispensary, treating it kind of like a liquor store, not wanting it to be on top of a school, daycare facility, and so forth. And we are viewing this really as akin to a farming operation from the standpoint of we're not selling to the public, we're not selling cannabis products to the public, there's not even in this type of facility public access to the facility. So again, our thought process was those buffers were really designed for medical dispensaries, recreational dispensaries, or it could be a situation where somebody's doing indoor cultivation and they're building, in essence, a manufacturing facility of sorts, and those buffers, we think, made sense there. But here, given the open-air nature of outdoor cultivation, as has been described for you, that it doesn't present some of the issues that these other facilities do, we didn't feel that buffer was essential here.
I just want to circle back. So if we're going to host this industry, I think we need to position ourselves to host more than one, accommodate more than one. Right, currently written, we can only accommodate one, or as proposed, we're only can accommodate one. Ideally, this industry, you want to have vertical integration, right? You want to have a retailer, you want to have production facility, you want to have manufacturer, you want to have cultivation, all in the same town, right? So your business structure should be vertically integrated right here.
Yeah,
But if we're gonna only give cultivation rights to one company, that limits our potential for others in our town to be attractive, to be an attractive host, right?
I can't speak to the vertical integration other than to say, my understanding is any cultivator can basically sell their product to any retailer within the state, right? It can go to anybody within the 169 towns. So I think a standalone cultivation facility, has, makes sense for someone to be operating. Again, as we sit here today, I guess if what you, again, I guess if the quarry is the only parcel currently that would meet the lot size, then I guess if they wanted to attempt to convert it, but if they can't, then again, somebody would have to change into the PI zone, if that's correct, in order to make it happen. But again,
I think what,
That's what you're
correct,
proposing.
correct,
I
correct.
think what the industry deserves and what the plant deserves in the community's recognition is rural residential farmland, as opposed to planning production innovation.
Yeah,
And then you could fully vet the operation
Yeah,
as it should be on rural residential farmland.
right, and I think, again, that's a judgment call by the commission, and again, our perception or assumption was that you might be more careful putting it in a zone you've already deemed appropriate for cannabis-related uses and not, I think your rural residential zone, if I recall correctly on the zoning map, covers a very large part of the town, so you would be, in theory, at least, really opening it up in a much broader fashion, and we just assumed people might prefer not to do that.
So does the state of Connecticut's regulations have any minimum size for outdoor grows? Minimum acreage?
Mr. Nagara was just saying, we believe the maximum grow space, as the state defines it, I think is 250,000 square feet, which is what we've proposed, and they have a very specific definition of what grow space
Right,
is,
but
which.
so you got 250,000 square feet for the grow space.
Yes.
But how about the land that accompanies the grow space?
I don't. No separate regulation on that. I think they're really regulating it from the max of the grow space.
15,000 would be the minimum for cultivation.
Well, I know in
And-
Massachusetts, some towns have tried to put a minimum of 50 acres for the whole property, and the Attorney General has said that's prohibitive. So I'm just wondering if Connecticut has done anything like that.
My understanding is Connecticut does not have a minimum overall site size requirement, and again, they're regulating on the grow space
Just on
not
the grow
exceeding the
space.
250.
Okay.
It defers to the commission.
Hmm.
When you read through the state legislation, the requirements, it defers to the commission, being us, for that regulation.
For a minimum?
Yeah, if you read commission, if you do a keyword search for commission, basically shows you everywhere we're mentioned in those statutes.
But, and again, I think that was part of the reasoning behind suggesting the 30-acre minimum, is even though there isn't a state requirement, that might make everyone more comfortable that, people aren't gonna be doing this on, right, small sites all over the place, right?
Isn't that big? I've got
Yes, ma'am.
21, so 30 acres is not that big.
So,
You're
250,000 square feet versus 30 acres. It's what, 250,000 square feet, I think it's like about 5 acres, 5.5 acres versus, yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm just curious.
Would you, your name and address,
My
please?
name's Jan Perry, I live at 8 Woodland, Mass. And I'm just curious, the current cannabis farm that you have, is it in Connecticut?
The current farms that we have are in Sheffield, Massachusetts, and New Jersey, Swedesboro, New Jersey, and Thorndike, Maine.
Are there residential properties in close proximity?
Yes, there are.
Have you had any complaints regarding smells or lights or anything that people are trying to get answers for?
Once again, the lights are really a non-issue because the plants are photosensitive. If we were to introduce lights at night, it would be very problematic for us during our flowering season. As far as the odor, all of the neighbors that are abutting our property have had no issues. I've actually become very friendly with the neighbors in New Jersey. I actually just came from the farm down there. Again, we really try and be good, not only good community partners, but good neighbors. We don't want to be invasive. I often joke how we have the mullet concept style of farm, where it's business in the front, party in the back, but there really is no party. It's just the cannabis field. We don't allow consumption on site, and the business up the front is really just our farm animals, our veggie gardens and things like that. I often bring the neighbors farm fresh eggs, veggies, and just had dinner with one of the elderly neighbors. She's quite lovely. She actually baked us some brownies. So we really do try and interact with the community as positively as possible.
Could you provide letters from some of these folks? Would that be possible?
I could certainly ask if that's something.
Support it if they're in, you know, close proximity to some. And I just want to say one more thing. A few weeks ago, I went to my daughter's house, and my grandsons told me to come out back and hit a couple of balls with them. And as soon as I walked out, I was like, wow, I smell marijuana. What's going on? So I went back to the front yard, and then I went back to the backyard, and I was like, oh my God. And I didn't see anybody smoking around. It was powerful. So I went in the house, and my grandson was still outside, and I said, Sage, I said, I can smell marijuana like so strong when I'm in your driveway. And she said, oh, you didn't see those two small plants? And I said, no. And she said, yeah, I have two plants. And I said, oh my God. I couldn't believe the smell. So I can't even imagine what a whole farm of that stuff would smell.
Right. It certainly depends on
But
the
what
proximity.
happened, there's a greenhouse that, she's in New Canaan, so that's a real nice little town. And the guy that owns the greenhouse is friends with her, and he was growing too much pot in the basement. And so, in the basement of his business, so he had to get rid of it, so he was asking all of his friends to take a couple of pots. So she took them.
Crap,
She
yeah.
asked me if I wanted one. No,
Thank
no, I
you.
don't, but it was, the smell just from those two, they were only about 2 feet. It was awful.
Okay, this is not the same situation.
Yes, it is a different situation, but that is also why we look for the larger properties, so we can have certain setbacks, just to create that natural dissipation. I'm sure when you were approaching the house, you didn't smell anything, but once you actually walked up to the plants, in closer proximity, you could smell them. Apples to oranges, it's certainly in that situation, but, yeah.
Thank you.
Can I just add?
Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. My understanding from the client is we're not expecting there to be, dozens of outdoor cultivation facilities in the state, probably just a handful, and that's gonna be it. And I think part of it is it's hard to find a farming type site, that's large enough to do it, for example, the way the client would like to do it, so they're not right on top of people that have a sizable.
There's also many municipalities that have not allowed it in the
That
regulations.
as well, but I think just in terms of the market for the outdoor facility, we don't think is gonna be, it just,
Well,
isn't
we're trying to
something.
get a clear understanding of how it would be developed here if
Yep.
it in fact gets approved, and then
Yes.
we got a special permit for the site development and so forth, so there's,
And I think a lot of again, totally understand that people have questions that have been voiced here tonight. I think a lot of the questions that have been voiced would be things that would have to be discussed as part of a special permit site plan application with all of those details spelled out for you for a site.
specifically with the contours of the property, what else you're dealing with, this is the regulation
Yes.
that would.
Yeah, and I will say, your property in Sheffield, it borders the Housatonic River, right? There was some concern about the Farmington River and the watershed there and everything, and your present property there. How many years have you been farming there?
We've been farming that property since 2019.
Okay, so 5 years, almost
Yes.
6, okay. And the other thing, I've made 2 visits there personally and probably spent an hour and a half each time there. And even when it was in bloom, very, very small amount of odor at that time. You weren't picking at the time, but just, that's what I saw. No.
It's certainly not as pungent as manure being
No,
spread on the
and-
cornfields.
And our residence is close by. We drove by, I think, 3 residences within a quarter of a mile
Yes.
of the property on the way into it from Route 7.
also have been to the facility in Sheffield. You talk here about the 12-foot high security fence, you talk about the motion sensors, but what about on-site 24/7 security? So
So-
if somebody trips a motion sensor, what happens?
So our cameras are monitored 24/7, 365 by our security. And if somebody were to, let's say, trespass, they would be on camera. Our security would be notifying them. In some instances, they would have the ability to actually turn the lights on to just show already that that person, we're aware that they're on site. If we saw that there were to be, any type of criminal activity, whether somebody tried to break into the facility or somebody tried to climb the gates or anything like that, it would just be treated as any other business where we would dispatch the police would show up, and that would more or less be that.
So then we have an issue with the police gaining access to the property, because if you have a trespasser inside, the police then have to have a way to get into the property.
Yes.
And does that violate any Connecticut statutes with it?
Not to my knowledge, and something I would also like to point out is, again,
Okay.
being a
And then-
good community, go ahead, please.
What about if your security system starts going off from critters climbing the fence, birds flying in, owls? So then you're gonna have a lot of calls to the police department, or?
Right, so I'll answer in stages. So first and foremost, again, we like to be good community partners. We actually invite the fire department as well as the police department out. We want to make sure that first responders are familiar with our facility, the layout, and also how to access. Get familiar with the employees, who is there, toward not only the outside of the facility but also inside. Again, it's typically just a fenced-in location with some very small structures, so there's not a whole lot. Certainly not like an industrial complex, like a maze of a building, but we still want to make sure that they have, clean and safe access right into the facility in case there were to be any issues. As far as animals, we can actually set the sensors, they call it dog mode or pet mode, to make sure that, geese flying in, ask me how I know, or turkeys, they do, of course, fly. They are free-range birds, they are wild animals, they can come and go as they please. We can alter the settings to make sure that they're not reporting false alarms, because that's, once again, it's a headache for us, but also we don't want to detract from the first responders in the area.
Can I ask another question?
Sure,
So, in regards to what zones they're allowed and by special permit, this is your regulation that you're proposing to us. Would you consider maybe an overlay district, where it would be a zone change to allow an overlay district versus having it allowed in a particular zone? And I know there's some.
I'm unfamiliar, I'll defer.
Sure, so what you're saying is an overlay that in theory could land in any zone or multiple zones within the town?
Right, so it would be a zone change to make an allowable use on that property. So that does, raise the discretion of the commission, but it would also then open it up to more properties.
Yeah, I guess a couple, well, I mean, a few quick thoughts on that would be, first off, I think as you said, you would be opening the potential use to more areas of the town. And in terms of the extent of regulatory authority, what we've been talking about is potentially coming back with a zone change for a particular property to PI. So the commission gets several bites at the apple here, on the text amendment, on changing the zoning designation of a particular property, and at that time, you would also be looking at a particular plan with a special permit and a site plan application, so you would know exactly what you were getting. So I think that's a multi-level of review, that you already have, and, if you were to try, I guess to me, you really would have to decide whether you want to have it farther ranging, which I think that would be, but I think from a zone change standpoint, whether you land it on a particular property and require a zone change for that, or whether there's a zone change where someone like us is requesting a change to the PI zone, that action would really be very similar coupled with the special permit. So I don't think it adds really a level of review for us or what we're proposing. But the main thing, I think, is just that you would be opening up a much larger area of the town where you could have, others potentially on other sites. And it procedurally, I guess I'm not quite sure, if you wanted to go that route, you'd have to give a lot of thought in terms of how you do it. I'm not sure that could be done as part of this proceeding, which is already, been.
No, it would be an additional step that we'd have to take in reviewing a regulation modification to, that's a good thought. Adam, anything else right now?
I have a question, if you don't mind. Denise Call, 149 Old Robertsville Road. So from what I understand, and I apologize, I'm late to the game and I'm trying to piece together what everybody is saying. The land you are going to be purchasing is currently zoned residential, yes?
Yes.
And you want to change it to this
PI.
and the PI is going to require a further change. Many companies fail. 5 years from now, should our interest in marijuana go away and it's no longer a lucrative business, we now have 30-some-odd acres PI zoned in a residential district that we could put in a biotech firm? Is that a potential?
Well, that's what that brings in.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just,
Yes.
again, I think that question really goes to a particular map change application, which is not before you, but, yeah, and I think, if you get a proposal, in front of you with a special permit and a site plan, then whoever that is, to develop this type of facility is obviously gonna be making a substantial investment in it between the state licensing, the putting the facility together, the purchasing the property for a facility. So I think, I think there's a need for this type of facility today, and I think once somebody gets going with it, they would have every reason to continue that very, very long-term into the future.
Can I ask one more question? What is, from a state licensing standpoint, is it a lottery? Is it if you meet the criteria, you're awarded?
Yeah, my understanding, and Jason, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you have a provisional, they have a provisional, this applicant has a provisional cultivation license in place already, and my understanding from Mr. Teal is, I think that the state is capping the number of cultivation licenses, it's already capped that are available, they have a
Is that
provisional.
provisional license for this site only, or for Winston only, or just in general throughout the state? And how many provisional licenses did the state issue? Do you know?
I think it's 16 right now, and I think about 12 or so are probably most likely gonna get open. We don't even think all 16 will get open.
Okay.
Wait, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
I think it's roughly, I don't know if it's, I think it's roughly 16 total. And I think we're expecting 11 or 12 ones to really get off the ground, because it's so.
Just growers.
Yeah, for growers, so you have to pay a $3 million license fee.
Do you have more than one in Connecticut?
Cultivation?
Yeah, a provisional license?
No, we have one provisional.
One?
Yes, for cultivation.
Well, you have one for something else?
We have, we'll open up 2 retails as well and product manufacturing. But the retails are in other towns.
Well, I understand, yeah. But they're in Connecticut,
Yes.
yeah.
And again, part of the reason why we like to separate them out is we do like to keep the farm, which is again, keeping that farmland aesthetic. We don't want to make it too busy. Like it had been mentioned before, having a retail establishment come where there's a lot of traffic in and out. Again, we become very boring. I know there's a lot of, concern at the moment, but things are very quiet. It really is a traditional farm.
So I just want to mention that too, is we all say farm, right? And so we're all not saying the same thing. When some people say traditional farm, they think of back in the day where your kid grows up at 12 and he goes to the farm and he figures out where his food comes from, or he helps out. In that sense, this is not a traditional farm, right? So all your employees have to be 18 years or older. They all have to be licensed, whether it's an employee, key employee, grower. You don't have to register with the state of Connecticut? So you got to fill an application with state of Connecticut.
Yes, so there are certain provisions that would make it, I guess, unsimilar to a traditional farm. What I guess I'm saying is that we're closer to traditional agriculture than we are what is commonly known as a cannabis cultivation facility. We're not indoors. We're not using an exorbitant amount of power. Again, we're planting with a tractor. We have 2 people on the back planting the seedlings on a water reel on the raised beds that we laid. I'm typically the one who would be operating the tractor, operating these attachments. And, again, the front of house, we typically do have a lot of livestock. We like Highland cows, they're very hardy, very good marbling in the meat. We actually have a breeding program up in Maine, just started one in New Jersey as well. I bought the calves, we'll be breeding them, and so as close as possible without the 12-foot fence and the different produce.
I'm grinning with a smile because
sure.
I visit your place in Sheffield, and I think your company, we can't regulate your company only, right?
Sure.
Exhibits the best practices in cultivation of any plant.
Thank you.
Yeah. But you have to also understand what the residents are concerned with. When I mentioned that it's not a traditional farm, you don't walk by and watch the corn grow like in a traditional farm. So when they say you're looking at a 12-foot fence, they don't want to look at a 12-foot fence. They'd rather it be on scene. So all I'm saying is that you have to understand and emphasize our residents and the impact to them when you write these regulations, when you propose them.
One other point that I just wanted to make is back to that 30-acre minimum. You've got the 250,000 grow area maximum that the state of Connecticut regulates. So the 30-acre minimum, I think, gets you to a situation where if you're simply fencing in the grow area, that's going to be a relatively small amount of a 30-acre parcel, which is going to leave the other 20 acres or 22 acres, 23 acres, whatever it is, looking like they do today without a fence around them. So it's not taking a 30-acre parcel and putting a fence around the whole thing. Much of what's out there would remain as it is today on any site.
So can I ask just a little bit about that? So the 250,000 grow space maximum, which is just under 6 acres, does that include buildings, outbuildings, processing, any of that?
Yeah.
Or is that just the cultivation?
I think there might be an additional approximate acre on top of that, and that's gonna be areas where they're handling materials. Correct, but there may be some handling of materials that's different from the growing of materials that would be within the fence as well.
So all of the facilities, the freeze areas and all that stuff is outside the fencing?
Inside.
It's inside.
And how so a typical fenced-in area would be about how many acres?
It's like 7 at the most.
Okay.
Say that. You should say 7 acres and on a 30-acre property. That really is clear.
Yep.
You could grow corn in front of the whole goddamn thing if you wanted to. No one would even know you were there.
So that is what I was referring to as far as our livestock. We have a Berkshire boar. His name is Boris. He's like the town celebrity. Our cattle's out front. Everybody comes up, takes pictures, pets them. Our barn is painted barn red. Again, other than the fence or just the common local knowledge of what we do, you wouldn't be able to differentiate us from any other farm. Which again, as far as access goes, people shouldn't be wandering onto properties or past the fence anyways, but all of the pastures are fenced in with typical cattle fencing. Again, very in line with what would be considered a traditional farm. Everything past the gates, the 12-foot fence that would delineate our operational area, that is the only area where we'd be handling, processing cannabis. None of that would go outside unless it would be transferred, and that would be obviously under lock and key.
But just to fine point this, Candace and Rista, that, you're not limited to that 7 acres. If you've got 30 acres, you could expand it to 29 acres
Yes,
at some
but
point.
we are limited by the canopy capacity, and that is capped at a state level at 250,000.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Okay.
so even if we wanted to, we could not unless the state amended their regulations.
So is there a way that you have seen or that you might recommend putting that into a regulation so that it's
restricted here.
it's restricted for all users, even, where it's a best practice,
I think as a practical matter, if we were to come back with a special permit and a site plan for a particular site, you're gonna see a plan, you're gonna see a fence line, you're gonna know how much is in it and how much is out of it, and that's gonna run with the land regardless of who the owner may be 50 years from now. And if somebody wanted to change it and double the fenced area, then they're gonna have to come back to you for permission for that. So I think that really can be handled through the special permit site plan process.
All right, we've got a couple more things to do on the agenda here tonight, so anybody else on the commission? Because I want to think about this, we're going to move it to the November meeting.
All right, I'm gonna make a motion to continue this public hearing until the public hearing.
If anybody else in the audience has any questions?
Oh, more? Yeah, sorry.
In regards to your security or lack thereof, really, we got the ring cameras, ADT, and they call our police departments, now all of us, as taxpayers, are paying for your security. I mean, this is big business.
They're,
My masonry company's working on a $45 million house up in Hillsdale, New York. That's Colorado weed money. And
so,
drug cartels are formed around this.
right, so we certainly,
Go to Mendocino County, you know, you can see what's going on here.
right, understood.
Can't
So,
afford to have security there?
okay, so we certainly don't have just ring cameras. We utilize very high-end cameras. They're not the granular 7-Eleven style where
Right,
somebody,
go in and respond.
But I think.
so that would be typical of any business.
Our police departments go in and respond?
That would be typical of,
What if there's a fire, God forbid?
then the fire department would show up, typical of any other business. Right.
Put the fire out, just as neighbors?
Clearly, if you want to contribute something to this conversation, give it to us, and then the big folks that are making the application will respond. I don't want to be going back and forth. It's just not going to get too far. Yes, ma'am.
I'm just wondering if, when we come back next month, if you could have a visual of this is the property and this is the fence.
No, this is not what we're dealing with now. This is
But I
not a,
think as residents, we would understand better, because that was just, I didn't get that before.
well, they'd have to do a lot of work to put a proposal together for the site development. And that's a whole different application, but it's another special hearing and all that business, so.
I understand that, but I think for those of us who live here or across the street from it, it'd be wonderful to have a visual of what you're talking about to get this permit.
We probably should go to Sheffield.
No. I mean, what she asking for is, we have a zoning map of these things, right? These areas?
Yeah, but-
You wanna see what the area is?
Well, I know what the area is,
Okay.
but
What is it you're looking?
How they would utilize it.
Oh, well, that's their specific application.
And the
That's kind of
concern
the
is,
next
it's
step.
not just for that site. It's, for any site, so we can't really, we have to look at it in a more
Walking
holistic.
in here, I expected to walk on the street and see a 12-foot fence a foot from me.
Oh.
And I hear that's not what is gonna happen. But I just heard that. I didn't hear that.
Well, that's
for
part
the
of what
last
we're
2
doing here,
hours.
so you get a picture of it.
That
Well, and I
would be
think
visual.
that's,
Not to be written in stone, but just to.
The applicant to maybe talk to some of the neighbors and talk specifics, but not,
Well, and that's not part of the application,
is.
so it's good to give you some guidance that way, but they're not locked into it afterwards. They're gonna bring us, if they get this modification to our regulations, they would then go out and have to do all the surveying and all the things that have to be done for them to bring us a legitimate plan and show us what they're proposing. And at that point, it'd be shown to everybody, and it's displayed on the screens and so forth. And then we'd all be able to talk about it and see the implications and what it means specifically to you as neighbors.
I just have a better picture in my
I
head.
agree with you, I agree with you.
Thank you.
And at that time, when there is a site plan, we can put conditions, make them move fencing, move it to another area. We have a lot of parameters.
But we would discuss it with
But
the applicant.
that would be just all discussed in the public hearing at that time.
All right.
But I think there's a concern that the buffer provision of 200 feet was taken, they're taking, their proposal takes that out. Okay, we'll talk about that.
So you were making a
Yeah.
motion to continue?
Continue, I make a motion to
November 25th.
continue,
I'll second.
public hearing on 24-11 to the November 25th meeting.
And I'll second that.
Peter, any discussion of the motion? All in favor of the motion? Okay, so we'll continue to the 25th of November.
Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you,
We
everyone, for
appreciate it.
coming also.
Okay, under new business, this is a consideration for,
This thing, the expansion of a zone that we zone specifically to keep us from having. Right?
okay, number 5, new business, application 24-12, zoning map amendment, applicant Eric and Jean Richard, owners Tatos LLC, address 220 East Lake Street. Proposal, applicant seeks to amend the zoning district for 220 East Lake Street from current Highland Lake zoning district to Highland Lake Business Zone, or district. So we need a motion to put that on the agenda for the 25th of November.
I'll move PCC application 24-12 zoning map amendment be listed on our agenda for November 25th for public hearing.
And John, second. And all in favor, please raise your hand. John Cooney. Okay. PZC, this is 5B, PZC 24-13, zoning map amendment, applicant Eric and Jean Richard, owner Hidden Holdings LLC, address 159 Lake Street. Proposal, applicant seeks to amend the zoning district for 159 Lake Street from current town single family zoning district to Highland Lake Business District, the HLB zone. We have a motion to move that into the, for a public hearing on November 25th, please.
I move we move applicant PZC number 24-13 zoning map amendment to November 24th meeting.
November
Second.
25th.
25th,
Public hearing.
public hearing.
Okay, and Charlene seconded it. All in favor of that?
Those 12 and 13 are both under 20.
Yes.
They're all under 20.
Okay,
Can I just ask a quick question? I'm pretty sure the answer doesn't need to go to the COG, correct? For any kind of review?
What does it need to go?
The two here for public
These two
hearings?
proposed.
Because it's not 500 feet from any other town?
No.
Okay, thank you. I'll make sure.
so 6A and B we've covered. Okay, just a reference that we don't have a meeting on the 11th because it's Veterans Day.
That's still in our town calendar as a meeting.
Yeah, that was missed, so that it should have been one of the dates that
So
was.
we gotta put a
so-
cancellation on it?
Correct, we'll do that.
Are you gonna do that?
Yes. Yeah, I wanted to make sure that that was okay, that we could
That's a
basically
holiday.
cancel.
Has to be.
Right.
Well, usually it moves to the next night, so. Okay, I've gotta be out of here around 9, so do you have something specific on your,
No, but if everybody got a chance to look at the list, I know it got even more comprehensive the last time. But yeah, if there's anything I gotta say this every
well,
time.
one thing that I would say, Lance, is, I'm not trying to, but how long have you been here?
Oh, 2 years.
Okay. You changed the meeting because you didn't advertise it.
The last
For
time.
public hearing, yes.
Right.
But the responsibilities to us as land use boards is important. And all the rest of the things, you've got a whole list of things that you've got to cover when you were hired. But it's important to us and the other land use boards, ZBA and wetlands, that these responsibilities, even looking at our regulations, you brought us an application that wouldn't fit because it's not in our regulations.
Correct.
So reading our regulations is as important as you sitting here as our town planner. And that helps us, expedites, the process and so forth, because this whole process could have happened probably a few months earlier if in fact they were directed to do something with regard to a modification of the regulations. So I would hope that you would.
I've been actually talking with Nova Farm since June, though.
I know
So,
you have. You've
yeah.
had a lot of meetings, and you also brought us with an application fee.
Right, that was originally, that was,
Yeah, and that was a mistake.
right.
Okay. So that's the point I'm making.
Mhm.
And that means read our regulations and see that they fit or they don't fit. And if they don't, give them the guidance about if they want to pursue what they're doing tonight.
Which is what we did, but yes.
All right. All right. Any questions about,
Nothing I have, and it's not on the report. What's going on with Spencer Hill Solar Project?
Great question. So,
Because it was never brought to us.
no.
Everything on the state website said it was given to the town in October of '23, and there was no response from the town of Winchester. So who the hell got it in the
But
town
the
of
problem is,
Winchester?
I don't think that was the property. I think it was Ahern's is the one that was originally
So
in
there's
the
two
siting
properties.
There's
council.
two properties there,
Yeah,
The one on top, and you got the Vineyard Sky property.
yep.
which has been
Vineyard
clear
Sky.
cutting.
What do they call it there? Vineyard Sky,
LLC.
yeah.
Yep.
Vineyard Sky Vineyard.
Yeah, so, I actually asked Jeff
Vineyard
to
Sky
follow up
Farm.
on that because,
But they
Because
clear
we were
cut
under
that
the
side hill
impression-
up there in the last couple of weeks.
right. So the clearing they've done is according to the plan that they gave us, which is a paper copy of it. And I haven't seen what the siting council reviewed supposedly last year, except for, I think it was the Ahern's property that we were
But
originally.
has anything gone to
told.
wetlands? Has anything, because nothing's come to us?
Is it more than an acre?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Huge amount,
so what's the step?
so.
Are you following up on that? to
Yeah.
Get it to us?
But I don't even know if you guys get a say. Do you
Pardon?
get,
Well,
once the siting council approves
siting
it?
council approves it, but then when they send it to the town, they ask for comments. And
Yeah.
it should be coming to us for comments. The one on Platte Hill did.
Okay,
It should be going to wetlands for erosion, sedimentation, erosion controls and everything. That's on a side hill. Everything runs down into Gilbert Brook and comes right down to Main Street,
Yeah.
into Hinsdale School.
So we won't issue local permits, but we can submit comments
Right,
to citing
and it
council.
should be.
And that Vineyard Sky Farms project, I have heard comments this weekend about how that field is growing. And people have commented that that whole field up there is getting bigger and bigger. And do we have an idea of what's going on up there?
the answer is yes.
Okay,
So
what's
Jeff has
happening?
been up there. Yeah, I wish Jeff was here tonight. So basically what I could do is find out and get a report for you.
Well, when something comes in, like on October of 2023, and it comes into the community for a response, a response with regards to it, probably the best thing to do is give it to the commissions that would have some input or possibility of commenting on it. And then we don't go to this after the fact kind of thing, 6, 8, 10, 12 months.
Yeah. The only thing I, like I said, got back, I think it was 2023, was the Ahern's property.
Yes,
And you guys saw that.
that's the solar panel property.
Yep.
It's all the way up on the top.
Yep. Which nothing has been done there yet.
Yeah.
But
But
the
the
other one
vineyards,
is
the
not
other
ever come
property in
to
that
the
field is
We
facing,
didn't get a notice.
facing the town,
Yeah,
is getting bigger and having trees cut down on it.
right.
And seems like it's cut away the tree line on top of the mountain. Because it
Ouch.
doesn't seem like to people that live around that was that way,
No.
a month ago.
That's all happened in the last month. You can see it from 263 when you come to
Mhm.
town.
So,
All right, well, this is one of the things we're getting involved with the state, getting into local communities and
But if they're gonna put solar panels, if the ultimate goal is the solar panels, we should be aware of that.
Right.
And on top of that, before it's too late.
True.
Oh, and the one that's been approved by the siting council that, you know, was sent to the town in October 23, New London, City of New London's getting the energy credits, not Winchester. The one on Platt Hill, the town manager brokered the deal that Winchester gets the energy credits. And, I mean, they're building on our property in our town, we should be getting the energy credits. Or selling them. Generate some revenue for the town.
Anybody else have any questions of Lance?
Find out tomorrow. Thank you. Papa's Market,
Number
they're light.
8 is the approval
Out
of
into the
minutes,
Really?
September
Okay.
30th.
Make a motion, we approve the minutes of September
I'll talk
30th
to him.
meeting.
Thank you.
Second.
Any comments? All in favor? Okay, I abstain, I wasn't at that meeting. Any communications, says none. Any other news with regards to, you're gonna put a cancellation in for the
Yep.
11th?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Make a motion, we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Thanks, everybody. All right, do your homework on this.
In your columns, yes.
Oh, I know it. Yeah, I know it. I'm not.
November 25th, excuse me, 25th, yes.
Catch up, right?
Plans? They won't have any plans submitted unless this is approved. Because until this is approved, they can't submit any plans because it's not allowed.
Is the application for?
Sure, I got an answer too.